What's up, guys? It's Sons of Thunder back, Drew and Chase. And today we're going to talk about defending the scriptures a little bit, but mostly we're going to be talking about the idea of sola scriptura. So, the fact that the Bible is the only infallible rule for Christian faith and practice. But before that, we just kind of want to get into the defense of the Bible as a whole. And to start that off, I'd like to talk about some manuscripts. What do you think about that, Drew?
I love it. I think that that's something that a lot of Christians struggle with is the understanding that we can be very confident in the Bible and what we have today based on the thousands of manuscripts that we have. And we have so much evidence and support that what we have today is the same as what we had when it was being written. And I know that's a big contentious point for a lot of believers who are still developing their faith. So I think it's really good for us to start there and get a bit of a groundwork for why we trust sola scriptura before we just talk about it.
Right. Yeah. I would agree. So, just getting into it, I'd like to talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls. So, these are some manuscripts that we discovered in the land of Israel. Um, Dates from between the third century the third century BC to the first century AD. Um, and parts of every book of the Old Testament are in there except for Esther and Nehemiah, though some people think that the parts of Esther and Nehemiah are included in other books. We just, we don't know. And then the best part about this, my favorite part about this, is that the complete scroll of Isaiah was in there. Probably the best prophetic book for the Lord Jesus, between chapters 52 and 53. Great chapters for prophecy of the Lord Jesus, and
Absolutely.
it's so awesome that we found the entirety of the scroll of Isaiah, and those verses that predict the Lord Jesus are very clear and in there.
Well, yeah,
So
and I think what's also so significant is that is the one where, I mean, you can take what the most common I hear is that we're playing a giant game of telephone with the Bible, right? And that it's been translated so many times. It went from Hebrew to Greek to, you start just going down the line to Greek and or German, all the way to English, and that's just not the truth. We go straight from the Hebrew to the English. We go from Greek to English, right? It's a very seamless process, one to one. And the Dead Sea Scrolls predated almost everything we had up to that point for the Old Testament,
yeah,
and it was as accurate as what we had before. There was, the big trump card was supposed to be that if we found these ancient works, it would totally disprove the Bible we have today, and we just don't see that at all. Actually, it's quite the
right,
opposite.
yeah, it's crazy. And actually, the entire book of Isaiah, the scroll, is on display in Jerusalem. I think there's just like this massive building that's just got the entire scroll around it. It's pretty neat. But yeah, it pushes back. I think the earliest manuscript that we have of the Old Testament was like ninth century. Before that, it could be wrong. It could
I,
have been earlier. It could have been a little bit later. Um,
I'm not
but
totally
whenever
sure
we,
when, but
yeah, whenever we found that, um, really pushed it back. Really cemented the idea that the Old Testament was before the coming of the Lord Jesus, and that it also um, makes a great case for the fact that the Jews didn't just make up their own history, like some skeptics will say. They'll say that the Jews came back to the land, and then they were like, "Well, we don't really have a history," so then they just wrote these books with all these fake names in them,
right.
and that doesn't seem to be the case, really. I mean, having manuscripts within hundreds of years of when they were written is fantastic for any stretch of the imagination, but having them that long ago, sealed in vases. Like, there's so many things that the Lord did throughout this entire process of Israel being reborn and then finding these vases with all these manuscripts. It's insane.
Absolutely. And something else, they believe that it was around when Daniel was happening, that was the beginning of the intermingling with another culture, and they started adapting practices and then using their understanding of God, and then they rewrote their whole history, and it's just bunk. It's so much. A lot of that is because they have to say those things because there's prophecy in Daniel and in Isaiah and Ezekiel that is so like so descriptive and accurate that the only way to make it make sense if you don't believe in God is to say that it was written after the fact, that it had to be written after
Right.
the fact, and that's just not the case.
Right.
We have evidence to prove otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so just kind of doing a brief overview of these. Then we have Codex Sinaiticus. So it's a complete New Testament from the 4th century in Koine Greek. This one's particularly important not because it's the earliest that we have of any New Testament book, but because it's in Koine Greek and it's includes both the Old Testament and New Testament. It also includes appended books, so books that we would consider to be maybe apocryphal, the Epistle of Barnabas and the Shepherd of Hermas. Um, and it also contains, which what I think is really cool, it contains corrections made. So like after it was made, then people were like, that's not really how we spell it, or this is, kind of fleshing out what something means. They will have written over it and kind of corrected it.
That's very
And
cool.
that's pretty neat to see that Christians were not only understanding of what the Bible meant, but helps us now to clarify what some things can mean. And then a large portion of the beginning of the Old Testament is missing, but most agree that it was more than likely there. It's just been lost since, um, because obviously the least disputed probably books of the Old Testament, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, the Torah, and some of the earlier books, it was more than likely there. Right? We're
Yeah,
not debating that early Christians thought that the Torah was not part of the Bible.
right. Absolutely.
So that one is super cool. We like that one. And then P52, one of the believer's absolute favorite pieces of papyrus to have ever been found, Wes Huff shared one with Joe Rogan, not the P52, but he made him one, I believe.
You gotta love Wes
It
Huff.
is the oldest. What's that?
I was just saying you gotta love Wes Huff.
Oh, dude, you gotta love
If
it.
anyone
But
listening hasn't checked out Wes Huff's stuff, he does Apologetics Canada. Big shout out. He's amazing. Please go and look him up.
please, yeah, he did a podcast with Joe Rogan, so chances are you have heard of him if you're listening to us. But yeah, love the guy so much. So P52 is the oldest known New Testament manuscript, and the best part is that it contains a portion of the Gospel of John. So for a long time, people thought that John was the latest one, and it still might be the latest one, but they thought that it was the latest one, and that John kind of added the fact that the Lord Jesus was God, and that Paul kind of continued that, because it's so obvious in the Gospel of John that the Lord Jesus is, claimed to be the I am, and it's dated early 2nd century. Some have actually placed it in the latter portion of the 1st century, though a lot of skeptics don't really like that claim. I love that claim because I know that the Gospel of John was written in the 1st century. But even the fact that it was dated early 2nd century, to have a copy or a manuscript of a book within that short of a time frame is basically unheard of.
Yeah, absolutely. And that starts to reframe our entire understanding of the circulation of the letters, right? And then and how quickly these were getting out to the people and to the churches. That this was a much faster turnaround than is usually explained. I was just watching a video, on accident. I was just scrolling, and it was a guy saying that Christians are too afraid to admit the truth that these books were circulating around hundreds of years after Jesus' death, and that's just not the truth.
Yeah, it can't be. Not when you have P52. Like
Absolutely.
the hero comes in, and I don't actually remember what portion it was. I know Wes talks about it in Joe Rogan, but it is a good portion of John.